There really is never a dull day at Celtic Football Club. Right, it was announced earlier by the club that Peter Lawwell's 17-year stay as Celtic Chief Executive will be coming to an end right at the end of June. I think there's 30 days in June, so it'll be the 30th of June. Then bang, the very next day, 1st of July. July's the best month of any year, but this year especially because we'll have fresh blood coming into the Celtic Chief Executive role. His name is Dominic McKay from Scottish Rugby. In this video, we're going to touch on him for most of it, but before that, I'm going to get the Peter Lawwell stuff out of the way. I'm sure we will have far more discussion on Peter Lawwell in the coming weeks and months as his term at Celtic comes to an end. But for now, just some immediate thoughts. I think it's time for him to move away. I think the way he's behaved this year has been, shocking, and I think it is the right time for him to go. In terms of Peter Lawwell legacies, can you have two legacies? I'm going to give him two legacies. First legacy that I've got for Peter Lawwell is that he was the Celtic Chief Executive during a period of unparalleled domestic dominance for the club. I think we won 29 trophies in total when he was at the club. 13 of them were league titles. He won 4 trebles in a row. So he was a chief executive during a period of dominance we will never see in any of our lifetimes, and for that he deserves a certain amount of credit. However, my second part of Peter Lawwell's legacy, and probably the one that's most dominant at the moment, is a feeling of real unfulfilled potential, not building from positions of strength, and I'm talking about not getting the right managers in at the right times, not getting the right players in at the right times, not getting the right players in at all, and the dismal European record while Peter Lawwell has been at the club is certainly one of the main things that will be remembered about his time for all of the domestic dominance. Celtic's last post-group European knockout tie, and I know that's a mouthful, basically the games after Christmas that actually matter, the two-legged ties. The last one of them we actually won over 2 legs was Barcelona away back in 2004 when Peter Lawwell had only been in the job, a matter of months. So that for me is a really telling statistic. Also the fact that in the last 9 years when we've been league champions, we've had this UEFA Champions route to the Champions League that was designed for clubs like ourselves. We have only made it to the group stage in 4 out of 9 of those years. I think that doesn't reflect too well on Peter Lawwell either. But on to the positive stuff. So who is Dominic McKay? Well, here's a little timeline of what he's been up to over the last 13 or 14 years, just in case of the small chance you haven't been keeping up to date with his life. So he joined Scottish Rugby back in 2008 after leaving Chivas Regal whiskey brand. He went into Scottish Rugby as their Director of Communications and Public Affairs. He then took on wider group responsibilities in 2011 before joining the Scottish Rugby Board as an Executive Director in 2013. He then became Chief Operating Officer in 2015. He still holds that role at the moment, and he is also the Chair of the Guinness Pro 14. He's been responsible for a number of things, most notably managing Murrayfield, the biggest sports stadia in Scotland and the home of the Scottish Rugby team. He's also headed the Scottish Rugby's threat management group following the COVID-19 pandemic, so he has good experience of dealing with the pandemic, which is obviously something that's pretty important and going to be pretty important for the times to come at Celtic. Now, I've taken all of that from the Scottish Rugby's website when they announced that he'd be leaving their role as Chief Operating Officer. It is worth just reiterating he's not CEO. That's a guy called Mark Dodson at Scottish Rugby. He's the Chief Operating Officer. So he is going into a slightly different role. To be honest, I'm not that in the know with business at all, to be honest. I don't really know the huge differences between those roles. I'm assuming they're relatively similar, or certainly the skills are transferable. But that's what he has done. It's worth saying there's comments from our soon-to-be new CEO on the Scottish Rugby website. There's also some ones I think Celtic have posted. I'm not going to go through all of them because they're quite lengthy, but you can get them all on 67hailhail.com along with all the analysis from our team. So after you finish watching this video, do that. There's also a forum as well, I should point out, forum.67hailhail.com, where you can have your say. Right, this is what I have been reading and finding out about Dominic McKay. So the main thing that seems to be coming from a lot of people who know of him and know him to a certain extent is that he is really good at, quote, and I'm doing the Neil Lennon quote, selling the brand. Now, that means that he is able to bring in money, mainly advertising, because he talks up Scottish rugby in that case. And gets people to invest. He likes to think outside the box. The most notable example of that is what he's done with Murrayfield in terms of even just away from rugby union. They have lots and lots of music concerts, or they certainly did back when we were allowed to hold things like music concerts. They also had other sporting events happening at Murrayfield. I remember a friendly between Liverpool and Napoli last season. That's the kind of example. Obviously, Hearts played there. We played Hearts in a Betfred Cup match not so long ago when the SFA double booked Hampden for the day. God, remember that. Celtic played some Champions League qualifiers there not so long ago. But also, most notably, he actually, spearheaded a Scottish rugby bid on behalf of Murrayfield to be the home of Scottish football. Remember a few years ago, back in 2018, when Murrayfield and Hampden were vying to be the new home of Scottish football. It seems a bit crazy to look back on, but Murrayfield came a lot closer than people realised to actually winning that bid, and that was spearheaded between Dominic McKay and the aforementioned Mark Dodson. The SFA were really impressed by Scottish Rugby's bid, even though they went for Hampden as the future home of Scottish football in the end. This is what they had to say back in 2018. They made a truly compelling case to move to Edinburgh and gave us a very difficult decision to make. I would like to pay tribute to the inspiration, energy and hard work of Scottish Rugby Chief Executive Mark Dodson and his Chief Operating Officer Dominic McKay. Both are true leaders in Scottish sport. So from that, it's clear to see that McKay already has a positive relationship with the SFA, which is obviously a big tick in the box with regards to coming in and being the Chief Executive of Celtic. It also, for me, shows that he isn't afraid to take a bit of a risk and go for things that nobody would be expecting. I mean, who seriously thought that Murrayfield could host Scottish football matches and be the home of Scottish football? I know they didn't win in the end, but they really did get a lot closer than people imagined. And for me, someone thinking outside the box is exactly what we need at the club going forward, because there's no doubt things have gone very stale. He has helped Scottish Rugby to turnover of 60 million, which is remarkable numbers for them. They're also were able to announce that Murrayfield is basically debt-free, which for anyone who follows rugby, which I don't, by the way, was seen as pretty impossible given that Murrayfield was heavily redeveloped in 1990s with not using a single penny of the public purse. So he seems like a bit of a miracle worker as well. Quite simply, he will leave Scottish Rugby in a much better position than they were back when he first became the Chief Operating Officer. I know it's not all down to him, but they have seen a massive growth. You only have to look at the attendances that the Scottish national team get. They used to only ever sell out for, Six Nations games against England and Ireland and that kind of thing when you had a big away support coming and, helping boost the crowd. But Scottish Rugby basically sell out every single game at Murrayfield, or they did before COVID-19 struck. I'm talking autumn internationals against less glamorous teams. Glasgow Warriors, who Dominic McKay also had a bit of a say in running their kind of ticketing and that kind of stuff. They've boosted their attendances from 1,500 to selling out Scotstoun at about 7,000. So it just seems like he's got a lot of ticks in the boxes, the various boxes. I know this is rugby union and not football. If you think of him and Dodson at Scottish Rugby of being the good cop, bad cop, he has very much been the good cop, whereas Dodson, I think, quite an aggressive person, maybe more forthright in what he says, whereas Mackay has been trusted to get the deals over the line and meetings, negotiations. He seems quite adept in that situation. But as I say, he has kept a low profile. That isn't going to be possible anymore. You're going to be chief executive of the biggest club in Scotland, the most successful club in Scotland by a country mile over the last 20 years. So it's a big, opportunity for him, but it's a big ask for him as well. He has never really had to deal with football transfers at all. So as much as he's been good at negotiations over the years, how will he cope with that? I think there's some big things that he has to solve at Celtic when he first comes in. The main one is going to be picking our next manager. For what it's worth, I think today's announcement from Celtic means that Neil Lennon will be in charge until the end of the season. But as was flagged up to me by 67 Hail Hales John, he didn't mention Neil Lennon at all in his quotes today, which I thought was pretty telling. So it seems like Lennon won't be in his plans going forward, but I think Neil Lennon will see out this year. McKay will then have a huge decision to make in the summer about who he brings in to be the new manager. I think, that may well determine how his time at Celtic goes. That one decision, it will either get the support on side or there'll be people very sceptical of him. Obviously, player recruitment is a massive issue as well. It's not been good enough over the years. As I said earlier, Peter Lawwell has missed the opportunity to sign key players at key times, and we've paid the price for that, quite literally. When you look at players like John McGinn and how much they're worth now. So I think that's a problem. I think youth development, as we've touched on the channel with Jackie McNamara, is a big problem as well. These are all things that Dominic McKay is going to have to answer. But those are questions for July. I think for now, we as Celtic fans, after a miserable season so far, can rejoice a bit tonight. We can have a few beers this weekend, or a glass of wine, whatever you fancy, because I think there's a bit of hope for us today. I think Peter Lawwell was holding the club back over the years. He is now away, or he will be away in a matter of months, and I think we can look to the future with renewed optimism. Let's hope that Dominic McKay is the man. Thanks for watching this video. Remember to leave us the comments below. Remember to subscribe if you've not done it yet. Forum.67hailhail.com as well if you want your say. And we're back tomorrow after the St Mirren game with the post-match live reaction.